My name is Eliza Hart. I was 28 when I learned that loyalty and love are not always measured the same way. The text from my mother arrived on a gray Thursday afternoon while I was reviewing spreadsheets in my small apartment. It was only 6 words long. We need help with the mortgage. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. A month earlier, I would have transferred the money without hesitation. For nearly 7 years, that had been my role in the family. Whenever a bill appeared, whenever something broke, whenever there was an emergency, my phone rang. And somehow I always answered. The strange part was that I wasn't wealthy. I worked as a financial analyst and lived carefully. I skipped vacations, postponed replacing my aging car, and ignored the tiny luxuries my friends seemed to enjoy without guilt. Meanwhile, my parents lived comfortably in the house where I grew up, the same house whose mortgage they now couldn't pay. Outside my window, rain tapped softly against the glass. I opened the message again. This time I noticed something unexpected. No greeting. No, how are you? No acknowledgement of the month of silence between us. Just a request. My chest tightened, because a month earlier, I had discovered something hidden inside a lawyer's office. Something that explained years of uncomfortable family dinners, careful omissions, and the way my younger brother always seemed to be protected from consequences. A single document had changed everything. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. The discovery hadn't been intentional. I hadn't gone looking for answers. In fact, I had spent most of my adult life avoiding certain questions because I was afraid of what the answers might reveal. The lawyer's office was quiet that afternoon. Soft beige walls. A clock ticking somewhere behind a closed door. The kind of place designed to feel calm, even when life wasn't. I had accompanied my parents because my father wanted help organizing financial paperwork. At least, that's what he'd told me. While they spoke privately with the attorney, I sat in the reception area reviewing documents they had asked me to sort. Mortgage statements, insurance records, tax papers, the usual collection of family responsibilities that somehow always ended up in my hands. Then I noticed a folder partially tucked beneath another stack. My last name was printed across the tab. Curious, I opened it. I still remember the feeling. Not shock at first. Just confusion. The folder contained estate documents, wills, asset distributions, property records. I scanned the pages once, then twice, then a third time because my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. The family home, investment accounts, savings, personal property. Everything. Every single item was designated to my brother, Nathan. 100%. No shared inheritance. No equal division. No explanation. Nothing. For several moments, I simply stared at the page while the room seemed to grow strangely quiet around me. The ticking clock became louder. My hands felt cold. I searched for another version. An older draft. A missing page. Anything. But there wasn't one. Just signatures, dates, legal seals, proof. And suddenly dozens of memories began arranging themselves into a pattern I had never allowed myself to see before. The pattern had been there all along. I had simply spent years explaining it away. Until that moment. On the drive home that evening, memories surfaced one after another, as if someone had opened a door I had spent years holding shut. None of them seemed important by themselves. Together, they told a different story. Nathan was 3 years younger than me. Growing up, everyone described him as the dreamer of the family. I was the responsible one. At least that's what people said. When Nathan forgot deadlines, my parents laughed and called him creative. When I remembered every obligation, they called it expected. When he struggled financially after college, they helped him. When I struggled, they praised my independence. At the time, I interpreted those differences as normal. Families aren't perfectly balanced. At least that's what I kept telling myself. But now I remembered things differently. The birthday dinners where my achievements became brief side notes before conversations returned to Nathan. The countless weekends spent helping my parents organize paperwork, repair household problems, and manage expenses. The emergencies that somehow became my responsibility. The phone calls that always began with, "Could you help us with something?" And the uncomfortable truth was this. I always said yes. Not because I enjoyed being needed, because I believed that's what family did. The realization settled heavily over me during the following days. I wasn't angry. Not yet. What I felt was sadness. A deep, quiet sadness that followed me everywhere. At work. At home. Even during simple routines like making coffee or folding laundry. I kept wondering whether my parents understood what they had done. Had they ever planned to tell me? Or had they expected me to continue paying bills indefinitely without knowing? One evening, after nearly a week of sleepless nights, I called my mother. My hands trembled slightly as the phone rang. When she answered, I asked a question that had been waiting years to be spoken. "Mom," I said softly, "why am I helping support a future that doesn't include me?" The silence that followed felt longer than any answer. The silence lingered so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then my mother exhaled. It was a small sound, but I recognized it immediately. It was the same sigh she used whenever she wanted to avoid a difficult conversation. "Eliza," she said carefully, "it's not as simple as that." I looked out the window of my apartment. Evening sunlight stretched across the neighboring buildings, casting long shadows that seemed to divide everything into light and dark. "It looks pretty simple on paper," I replied. Another pause. "I knew you saw the documents." "Not I'm sorry. Not we should have told you. Just an acknowledgement." Something inside me shifted. For years, I had believed that if there was a misunderstanding, we could talk through it. That there had to be an explanation I simply hadn't heard yet. But hearing those words made me realize there hadn't been a misunderstanding at all. There had been a decision. A deliberate one. My mother explained that Nathan had different needs. That he had struggled more. That he would need greater support in the future. I listened quietly. What surprised me wasn't what she said. It was what she didn't say. She never mentioned my sacrifices. Never mentioned the money I had contributed. Never mentioned the weekends, the emergencies, the years of showing up whenever they called. When the conversation ended, I sat alone in silence. The apartment felt unusually still. On the coffee table lay a small notebook I had kept since college. Inside were old budgets, goals, and lists of things I hoped to accomplish one day. Travel. A home of my own. Graduate school. Dreams I had postponed because helping my family always seemed more urgent. That night, for the first time in years, I opened a fresh page. And beneath the date, I wrote a sentence that felt both terrifying and freeing. I cannot keep funding a life that only values my support, not my place in it. The next morning, I stopped paying the bills. I didn't make an announcement. I didn't argue. I simply stepped back. And for the first time in years, the silence came from me. The first week was strangely peaceful. No urgent phone calls. No messages marked important. No unexpected requests appearing in the middle of my workday. At first, I kept checking my phone out of habit. Years of conditioning had taught me to expect some new crisis that needed my attention. But nothing came. And that silence revealed something I hadn't noticed before. I was exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. The constant responsibility I had carried for years had become so familiar that I no longer recognized its weight. Without it, I suddenly had time. Time to read in the evenings. Time to take long walks after work. Time to think about my own future instead of everyone else's. It felt unfamiliar. Almost uncomfortable. Then, near the end of the second week, my brother called. Nathan rarely called unless he needed something. The sight of his name on my screen stirred a complicated mix of affection and resentment. I answered anyway. "Hey," he said casually. For a few moments, he talked about ordinary things. Work. Weather. A restaurant he had recently visited. Then he finally reached the real reason for the call. "Mom and Dad are stressed." I waited. "The mortgage payment is coming up." There it was. The familiar script. Only this time, something felt different. Nathan sounded concerned, but not surprised. As though he had always assumed someone else would solve the problem. As though the solution naturally belonged to me. I asked a question I had never asked before. "Have you offered to help?" The line became quiet. Not angry. Not defensive. Just surprised. A few seconds later, he gave a vague answer about expenses and future plans. I listened carefully. Then I realized something that left me staring at the wall long after the call ended. For years, my parents had treated Nathan as the future owner of everything they built, but they were still relying on me to keep it standing. And suddenly, the arrangement no longer made sense. A few days after Nathan's call, my mother's message arrived. We need help with the mortgage. The same house, the same expectation, the same unspoken assumption that I would quietly step in and make everything work. I stared at the message for nearly an hour. Not because I didn't know what to say, because I was finally learning that not every message required an immediate response. Outside, the rain had started again. The soft rhythm against the window reminded me of childhood evenings when I would sit at the kitchen table doing homework while my parents discussed finances. Back then, I believed families shared burdens equally. Life had taught me otherwise. That weekend, I drove to my parents' house. The place looked exactly as I remembered. The white fence my father painted every spring. The flower pots near the front steps. The porch light that always seemed slightly dimmer than it should have been. For a moment, memories almost convinced me to forget everything. Then I remembered the folder, the signatures, the years. Inside, the conversation remained polite. No raised voices. No dramatic accusations. Just uncomfortable honesty. I explained that I could no longer contribute financially while being excluded from decisions about the family's future. My father looked older than I remembered. My mother folded and unfolded a napkin between her fingers. Neither interrupted. When I finished, something unexpected happened. No one argued. No one denied it. Instead, my father quietly stood and disappeared into his study. Several minutes later, he returned carrying a thick brown envelope, the same type of envelope that had changed everything a month earlier. He placed it on the table between us. Then he said words I never expected to hear. We made a mistake. For a moment, nobody moved. The envelope remained unopened. And somehow, that frightened me more than any argument could have. The envelope sat between us like a bridge no one knew how to cross. For several seconds, I simply looked at it. The room felt smaller than I remembered. Afternoon light filtered through the curtains, painting pale rectangles across the dining table where countless family meals had taken place. Finally, I opened it. Inside were updated estate documents, recent dates, fresh signatures, pages carefully organized. My eyes moved slowly across the text. The house would now be divided equally. The savings and investments would be shared. The distribution reflected both children, not just one. I should have felt victorious. Instead, what I felt was unexpectedly complicated. Relief, sadness, confusion, because the documents fixed a legal problem, but they couldn't erase years of emotional history. My mother's eyes glistened slightly. We kept telling ourselves it was practical, she said quietly. Nathan always seemed to need more help. My father nodded. And, because you were capable, we started depending on that. Capable. I had heard that word my entire life. For years, it sounded like praise. Now I understood that sometimes capability becomes an excuse for taking someone for granted. The realization seemed to affect them as much as it affected me. Nathan arrived later that evening after my father asked him to come. The conversation that followed wasn't dramatic. There were no shocking confessions. Only uncomfortable truths spoken aloud for the first time. To my surprise, Nathan admitted he had assumed our parents had helped me in ways they helped him. He genuinely hadn't known how much financial responsibility I had carried. As the evening faded into dusk, something shifted inside the room. Not perfect healing. Not complete resolution. Just honesty. And honesty, I was beginning to learn, was often where healing started. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because the situation was unresolved, but because it finally was. Or, at least, it was changing shape in a way I didn't yet understand. The next morning, I sat alone in my apartment holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold without me noticing. For the first time in weeks, no one had called. No one had texted. No one was waiting for an immediate answer from me. The silence used to feel like pressure. Now it felt like space. Space I didn't know how to use yet. I thought about the envelope again. About the revised documents. About my parents' quiet admission that they had made choices without fully seeing their consequences. And I thought about Nathan, not as a rival or comparison, but as someone who had been placed inside a story neither of us fully understood. The truth didn't erase the past, but it did reshape how I carried it. Later that afternoon, my mother called. I almost didn't answer, but I did. Her voice was softer than before. No request this time, just a question. Are you okay? I hesitated. It wasn't a question I was used to receiving from her. I think I am learning how to be, I said finally. She didn't respond right away. Then she said something unexpected. We should have seen you differently. That sentence stayed with me longer than any apology, because it wasn't about money anymore. It was about recognition. Over the following weeks, things didn't return to how they were before. They became something new, slower, more deliberate. Boundaries remained. So did distance. But so did conversation. And for the first time in years, I stopped measuring my worth by how urgently I was needed. One evening, I walked past my childhood home again. The lights were on inside. Someone was cooking dinner. Laughter drifted faintly through the window. I didn't go in. I just stood there for a moment, letting the memory and the present exist side by side without fighting each other. Then I turned away. Not as someone abandoned. Not as someone chosen last. But as someone finally choosing herself. And for the first time, that felt like enough. In the end, this wasn't just a story about inheritance or money. It was about recognition, silence, and the quiet cost of being the reliable one. Eliza's journey shows that sometimes the deepest betrayal isn't loud or obvious. It's the slow forgetting of your value while you keep showing up for everyone else. But healing doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from stepping back, telling the truth, and finally choosing yourself without guilt. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more emotionally powerful stories like this. And tell us, have you ever been the strong one who was taken for granted?